The alien warrior screamed as Timothy Richardson blasted smoking holes through its exoskeleton with his pulse rifle, green ichor splattering the rubble. Zephyrus was lost. Buildings crumbled under Gamelon plasma bombardment. Hordes of insectoid soldiers skittered through the ruins, slaughtering humans without mercy. Private Richardson huddled behind a shattered wall as bolts sizzled overhead. Gritting his teeth, he popped up to snap off shots from his rifle, dropping two bug-like gamelons as they scuttled closer. A colossal explosion rocked the structure. Shrapnel and debris rained down on Timothy, the concussive shockwave slamming him to the ground. As the smoke and dust cleared, a towering figure emerged from the ruins. It was Karos, the feared Gamelon warlord. The creature's black carapace glinted in the sun, ichor dripping from his serrated claws. Leveling a massive plasma cannon at the battered human, Karos clicked his mandibles together in a cruel approximation of laughter. "Surrender, meat thing," the alien warlord hissed. "Accept the superiority of the Gamelon ascendancy, and I may grant you a painless death." Spitting blood, Timothy glared back at Karos defiantly. Tightening his grip on the rifle, he snarled, "I'll never surrender to an overgrown roach like you. If Zephyrus falls, you'll be one step closer to the heart of the Union. I'd rather die than let that happen." "That can be arranged, primate," Karos chittered with glee. The alien warlord opened fire, superheated plasma searing the air as Timothy rolled desperately to avoid the shots. He knew this could be humanity's final stand. If the Gamelons gained a foothold here, they could strike at the core human worlds. Billions would perish. Bellowing a battle cry, Timothy charged at the warlord, determined to kill Karos or die trying. For the sake of humanity and all he held dear, the alien could not leave this planet alive. The alien warlord blocked Timothy's frenzied assault, parrying his strikes with contemptuous ease. Suddenly, a blinding white light erupted overhead. A Gamelon dropship broke through the clouds, flanked by a swarm of attack drones. The ship touched down, and its ramp lowered with a hiss. Insectoid troops poured out, mandibles clacking, plasma rifles at the ready. At the head of the new arrivals strode Zorgax, Karos's second-in-command. The sadistic warrior's reputation preceded him. He took perverse pleasure in tormenting human captives. Timothy had heard whispers of the atrocities committed in Zorgax's infamous laboratories. The human soldier keyed his suit's built-in transmitter. "This is Private Richardson, requesting immediate backup at my location. I repeat, I need backup now." Karos barked an order in the Gamelon tongue, gesturing at Timothy. "Take him alive! This meat thing will serve as an example to the rest of his kind." The alien reinforcements surged forward. Timothy, fueled by adrenaline and desperation, dropped 3 Gamelons with precise shots. He ducked and weaved, using the rubble for cover, but the enemy's numbers began to tell. A plasma bolt clipped his shoulder, spinning him around. Another seared his thigh, sending him to one knee. Zorgax closed in, his serrated blades glinting. The alien commander raised his fist for a crushing blow that would stun the human long enough for capture. Suddenly, a salvo of rockets streaked overhead, slamming into the Gamelon lines in a storm of fire and shrapnel. Human dropships bearing the insignia of the United Terran Defense Force roared into view. The lead ship flashed its running lights twice, a signal Timothy recognized. His distress call had been answered, and none other than Captain Jake Hawkins had come to his aid. The human ships touched down, disgorging squads of power-armored troopers. Tracer rounds and plasma bolts crisscrossed the battlefield as the two sides clashed. In the chaos, Timothy wrenched free of the Gamelons trying to subdue him. He staggered toward his comrades, scooping up a fallen plasma rifle on the way. "Damn you primates!" Karos snarled. The warlord fired wildly at the human reinforcements, his shots going wide. "This isn't over. Gamelons, retreat and regroup. We'll make the humans pay for this." As the aliens fell back under covering fire from their dropship, Timothy reached the human lines. He collapsed into the arms of Captain Hawkins, his best friend since their days in the academy. "You sure know how to get yourself in trouble, Tim," Jake said, clapping the injured private on the back. "Medic, see to Richardson's wounds." Timothy grinned weakly as a corpsman applied pressure bandages and painkillers. "Guess I owe you one, Jake. Looks like we gave the bugs a bloody nose today." Captain Hawkins surveyed the battlefield, littered with Gamilon and human dead. "Maybe so, but this is just the beginning. Karos and Zorgax won't give up Zephyrus without a fight. We need to be ready for anything." As Timothy recovered in the field hospital, Captain Hawkins strode into the tent, a grim expression on his face. He sat on the edge of the private's cot, his voice low and urgent. "Command just sent orders. They need us to infiltrate a key Gamilon supply base on Zephyrus's second moon. Intel suggests it's not just a crucial resupply point, but also houses one of Zorgax's secret labs. The same labs where he's been conducting those fucked-up experiments we've heard about." Timothy sat up, wincing at the pain in his wounded shoulder. "Experiments? What kind of experiments?" Jake shook his head. "The kind that keep you up at night. Rumors say he's been trying to create some sort of super soldier using human DNA. Command wants us to go in quiet, plant some charges, and blow the place to hell." "Just the two of us?" Timothy asked, already knowing the answer. "I'm assembling a team, best of the best. We'll be going in with captured Gamilon shuttles to avoid detection." Jake stood, clapping his friend on his uninjured shoulder. "Get some rest. We move out at 400. The journey to the moon was tense. The human soldiers huddled in the cramped confines of the alien shuttles. They managed to slip past the Gamilon patrols, their disguise holding up under scrutiny. Once on the surface, the team moved quickly and quietly, planting explosives at key points to maximize damage to the supply lines. As they approached the research facility, Timothy felt a growing sense of unease. The building was heavily guarded, with patrols of Gamilon soldiers marching the perimeter. Using the cover of darkness, the human team managed to breach the outer defenses and make their way inside. What they found within the facility's walls was worse than any of them could have imagined. Row upon row of stasis pods lined the walls, each containing the twisted, mutated form of what had once been human. Zorgax's experiments had been a success, after a fashion. He had created his super soldiers, but at a horrific cost. "Plant the charges," Jake ordered, his voice tight with anger. "We're going to blow this abomination to smithereens." The team worked quickly, setting the explosives and preparing to make their escape. But as they turned to leave, a new horror emerged from the shadows. A group of Gamilon super soldiers, their bodies warped and enhanced by the stolen human DNA, blocked their path. At their head stood Zorgax, his eyes glinting with malice. "Foolish primates," the alien scientist hissed. "Did you think you could destroy my life's work so easily?" With a roar of fury, the super soldiers charged, their strength and speed far beyond anything the humans had faced before. Jake and his team opened fire, their weapons seeming to have little effect on the advancing horde. Timothy found himself face to face with Zorgax, the alien's serrated blade slashing through the air. He ducked and weaved, his training and instincts taking over as he engaged the Gamilon in a deadly dance of hand-to-hand combat. Around them the battle raged, the human team fighting desperately to hold off the super soldiers, long enough to detonate the explosives and destroy the facility. Jake fought like a man possessed, his rifle spitting death as he tried to cover his squad's retreat. Timothy grappled with Zorgax, their limbs entangled as they fought for dominance. The human soldier's muscles burned with exertion as he struggled against the alien's enhanced strength. With a burst of adrenaline-fueled power, Timothy wrenched free of Zorgax's grip and slammed his fist into the Gamilon's jaw, sending him reeling. Zorgax staggered back, his serrated blades clattering to the floor. Timothy lunged forward, his hands closing around the alien's throat. As he prepared to squeeze the life from his foe, a flicker of doubt stayed his hand. The Geneva Conventions, the rules of engagement. They echoed in his mind, a reminder of his humanity in the face of the Gamilon's monstrous actions. That moment of hesitation was all Zorgax needed. With a hiss of malice, the alien scientist lashed out, his talons raking across Timothy's face. The human soldier fell back, blood streaming from the gashes in his cheek. Zorgax scrambled to his feet, his eyes darting to a control panel on the wall. "Fools," he snarled, "you may have won this battle, but you will never defeat the Gamelon ascendancy." With a final defiant roar, Zorgak slammed his fist down on a large red button. Alarms blared throughout the facility as a robotic voice announced, "Self-destruct sequence initiated. Detonation in T-5 minutes." "Fall back," Jake shouted, his voice barely audible over the cacophony of explosions and gunfire. "We need to get out of here now." The human team fought their way through the crumbling corridors, dodging falling debris and gouts of flame. Behind them, the super soldiers pursued, their enhanced bodies allowing them to shrug off wounds that would have felled a normal Gamelon. Timothy and Jake brought up the rear, their weapons spitting death as they covered their squad's retreat. The walls shook and the ground heaved as the facility tore itself apart, the explosions growing ever closer. With seconds to spare, the human team burst from the collapsing building, sprinting towards their waiting shuttles. The Gamelon supply base erupted in a massive fireball, the shockwave throwing them to the ground. As they picked themselves up, the sound of plasma fire filled the air. Karos, his eyes blazing with fury, led a contingent of Gamelon troops in a vengeful charge towards the humans. "Scatter and take cover," Jake ordered, his rifle already barking in short, controlled bursts. The human team split up, using the rugged terrain to their advantage as they engaged the Gamelons in a running battle. Timothy ducked behind a boulder, his heart pounding in his chest as plasma bolts sizzled overhead. He popped up, sighting down his rifle's scope and dropping a Gamelon soldier with a well-placed shot. Beside him, Jake lobbed a grenade, the explosion sending a group of insectoid warriors flying. Despite their efforts, the Gamelons pressed forward, their superior numbers threatening to overwhelm the humans. Timothy's rifle clicked empty, and he reached for his last magazine, knowing that it would only buy them a few more moments. Suddenly the sky above them filled with the roar of engines. Human attack craft, sleek and deadly, swooped down from the clouds, their weapons already spitting fire. Rockets and cannon rounds slammed into the Gamelon ranks, turning the tide of the battle in an instant. Under the cover of the air support, the human team made a break for the extraction zone, their shuttles waiting with engines primed. They piled aboard, the hatches sealing behind them as they lifted off, leaving the devastation of the Gamelon base behind. In the aftermath of the mission, Timothy and Jake stood before a panel of grim-faced officers, their report on the Gamelon super soldier program sending ripples of shock and disbelief through the room. "This changes everything," one of the generals said, his voice heavy with the weight of the revelation. "We must adapt our strategies to counter this new threat." As the officers debated their next move, an aide entered the room, his face pale. "Sir, we've just received word from our intelligence network. Karos has been recalled to the Gamelon homeworld. They say he's to face punishment for his failure here on Zephyrus." Jake frowned. "Who's taking his place?" The aide swallowed, his voice trembling. "A new commander, sir. One with a reputation for ruthlessness and a history of using weapons of mass destruction against civilian targets. They call him Admiral Zarrox." His compound eyes glinting with malice, stood on the bridge of his command ship as it loomed over Zephyrus's third moon. The human civilian colony below, a peaceful sanctuary amidst the chaos of war, lay defenseless before the Gamelon fleet. "Prepare the chemical weapons," Zarrox clicked, his mandibles twitching with anticipation. "Let the humans witness the price of their defiance." The Gamelon weapons officers worked frantically at their stations, priming the newly developed chemical warheads. With a final decisive command from Zarrox, the missiles streaked towards the colony below. The warheads detonated above the settlement, releasing a sickly green cloud that engulfed the habitat domes. Screams of agony echoed across the comms as the chemical agent seeped into the air filtration systems, indiscriminately slaughtering men, women and children. Within minutes, the once thriving colony lay silent, its inhabitants reduced to twisted, lifeless husks. News of the atrocity spread like wildfire through the human forces, sparking outrage and calls for immediate retaliation. In the command center on Zephyrus, Timothy and Jake watched the footage in horror, their hearts heavy with the weight of innocent lives lost. "We have to strike back," Jake growled, his fists clenched at his sides. "We can't let this go unanswered." However, High Command, wary of escalating the conflict further, ordered a strategic withdrawal from Zephyrus. The top brass feared that engaging Xerox directly could provoke the use of even more devastating weapons, putting countless more lives at risk. Frustrated by the decision but unwilling to give up, Timothy and Jake volunteered for a covert mission to infiltrate the Gamelon command ship. Their objective? Gather critical intelligence on the enemy's new weapons and battle plans. Disguised as Gamelon soldiers and flying a captured enemy shuttle, the two friends managed to slip aboard Xerox's vessel undetected. They made their way through the labyrinthine corridors, avoiding patrols and security systems, until they reached the central computer core. As Timothy hacked into the mainframe, downloading terabytes of encrypted data, Jake kept watch at the door. Suddenly, the sound of clicking mandibles and chittering voices approached from the hall outside. The two humans froze, listening intently as they overheard a chilling conversation. "The Doomsday device is nearly complete," one Gamelon officer reported, its voice laced with cruel satisfaction. "Once deployed, it will annihilate every human on Zephyrus, leaving the planet ripe for conquest." "Excellent," Admiral Xerox replied, his words dripping with venom. "Prepare the device for transport to the surface. We will show these primates the true might of the Gamelon ascendancy." Exchanging a look of grim determination, Timothy and Jake knew they had to act fast. They split up, with Timothy continuing to gather what intelligence he could, while Jake set out to locate and sabotage the Doomsday device. Moving swiftly through the ship's corridors, Jake followed the schematics he had memorized, making his way towards the vessel's armory. As he approached the heavily guarded section, a group of Gamelon soldiers spotted him, their shouts of alarm echoing through the halls. Plasma bolts filled the air as Jake dove for cover, returning fire with his captured Gamelon rifle. He fought his way into the armory, desperately searching for the Doomsday device amidst the chaos of the firefight. Spotting the massive spherical weapon in the center of the room, Jake rushed forward, dodging enemy fire as he primed a set of explosive charges. He planted the bombs on the device's control panel, setting the timer for a scant few minutes. Just as he was about to make his escape, a searing pain tore through his shoulder. A Gamelon soldier had managed to hit him with a plasma bolt, the wound instantly cauterized by the superheated energy. Jake stumbled, his vision blurring as he struggled to stay conscious. Alarms blared throughout the ship as Timothy, having downloaded what data he could, raced to his friend's aid. He burst into the armory, his rifle spitting death as he cut down the remaining Gamelon guards. Half dragging the wounded Jake, Timothy fought his way back to the shuttle bay, the timer on the explosives ticking down with each passing second. They stumbled aboard their captured ship, sealing the airlock just as the first detonations rocked the Gamelon vessel. Engaging the engines, Timothy punched through the command ship's weakened shields, streaking away from the crippled behemoth as secondary explosions tore through its hull. Behind them, the Gamelon ship listed heavily, its internal structure compromised by the sabotage. In the shuttle's cramped confines, Jake lay semi-conscious, his breathing shallow as Timothy applied emergency first aid. The intelligence they had gathered weighed heavily on their minds. The Doomsday device may have been destroyed, but the war was far from over. As they raced back to the human fleet, Timothy knew that the battle for Zephyrus had entered a new, terrifying phase. The Gamelons, under Admiral Xerox's ruthless command, would stop at nothing to crush the human resistance. The fight for survival had only just begun. The human shuttle screamed into the base's landing bay, its hull scorched and pitted by plasma fire. Timothy staggered down the ramp, half carrying Jake's blood-soaked body. Medics rushed forward, loading the grievously wounded soldier onto a gurney. High Command awaited Timothy in the briefing room, their faces a collection of grim masks. Major Davis, his eyes shadowed by fatigue and strain, gestured to a holographic display. "The intelligence you gathered confirms our worst fears," Davis said. "The Gamelons have developed a doomsday device, an orbital platform capable of launching simultaneous chemical strikes across Zephyrus. They're planning to deploy it within days." Timothy clenched his fists, rage and desperation warring within him. "We can't let that happen, sir. Billions of lives are at stake." Davis nodded, his jaw tight. "Agreed. That's why we're launching an immediate counter-operation, and you, Lieutenant Richardson, will lead it." As the Major outlined the plan, Timothy felt a cold sense of purpose settle over him. He would assemble a team of the best pilots and soldiers, including his old rival, Lieutenant Alex "Maverick" Thompson. Together, they would infiltrate the Gamelon platform and destroy it before it could be activated. The hours blurred together as Timothy and his team prepared for the mission. They pored over schematics of the orbital station, identifying weak points and plotting infiltration routes. Maverick, his cocky grin tempered by grim determination, worked alongside Timothy to coordinate their fighter wing. As darkness fell, the human strike force launched, stealth fighters and boarding pods streaking towards the Gamelon platform. They slipped through the enemy's sensor net, closing in on their target. But as they approached the station, alarms blared to life. The Gamelons had detected their approach. Plasma fire streaked through the void as the human ships jinked and dodged, fighting their way towards the boarding points. Timothy gripped the controls of his pod, teeth gritted as he guided it through the maelstrom. The pod slammed into the station's hull, magnetic clamps locking it in place. With a hiss of hydraulics, Timothy and his team emerged into the corridors of the Gamelon stronghold. Plasma bolts sizzled through the air as elite Gamelon troops poured into the corridor. Autonomous defense turrets swiveled to track the humans' movement. Timothy dove for cover, his rifle spitting death as he returned fire. "Push forward," he roared, lobbing a grenade down the passageway. The explosion tore through the Gamelon ranks, buying the humans precious seconds. They fought their way deeper into the station, planting explosives at key structural points. The Gamelons fought with desperate ferocity, determined to protect their doomsday weapon. As they neared the central control room, a towering figure emerged from the shadows. Zorgax, his compound eyes glinting with malevolent intelligence, blocked their path. "You're too late, primates," the alien scientist hissed. "The device is already primed. Zephyrus will burn, and your pathetic resistance will be nothing but ashes." Timothy stepped forward, his rifle leveled at Zorgax's head. "Not if we have anything to say about it." The two adversaries lunged at each other, their bodies colliding in a brutal clash of strength and skill. They traded blows, fists, and feet, smashing against chitinous armor and yielding flesh. Around them, Maverick and the others fought desperately to hold back the Gamelon reinforcements. Plasma bolts and shrapnel filled the air, the confined space of the corridor transformed into a hellish battleground. Timothy ducked under a vicious swipe from Zorgax's talons, driving his fist into the alien's midsection. Zorgax staggered back, his mandibles clacking in fury. The Gamelon lashed out with a powerful kick, sending Timothy crashing into the bulkhead. Stars exploded across Timothy's vision as he struggled to rise. Zorgax loomed over him, a wicked-looking blade sliding from a sheath on his forearm. "Die, meat thing," the alien snarled, raising the blade for a killing blow. Suddenly a plasma bolt seared through Zorgax's wrist, severing his hand at the joint. The Gamelon scientist howled in agony, whirling to face his attacker. Maverick stood at the end of the corridor, his rifle smoking. "Get up, Richardson," he called, a fierce grin splitting his face. "We've got a job to finish." Timothy surged to his feet, scooping up his fallen weapon. Together, he and Maverick advanced on the central control room, their comrades fighting tooth and nail to cover their approach. They burst into the chamber, plasma bolts stitching the air around them. Gamelon technicians scrambled for cover, their insectoid faces contorted with fear. At the center of the room, a massive holographic display showed the countdown to the doomsday device's activation. The numbers raced towards 0, each second bringing Zephyrus closer to annihilation. Timothy charged forward, his rifle spitting death as he cut down the Gamilon guards. He reached the control panel, his fingers flying over the alien interface. "Maverick!" he shouted, desperation edging his voice. "Cover me!" His old rival took up a defensive position, his weapon barking as he held the Gamilons at bay. Timothy worked frantically, sweat beading his brow as he sought to shut down the device. The countdown ticked lower, the seconds slipping away like grains of sand. Plasma bolts sizzled past Timothy's head, the heat of their passage searing his skin. With a final desperate keystroke, Timothy inputted the deactivation code. The holographic display flickered, the countdown freezing a mere handful of seconds from 0. A deep, shuddering groan echoed through the station as the doomsday device powered down. The Gamilon technicians fled, their morale shattered by the humans' victory. Timothy sagged against the control panel, his heart hammering in his chest. Maverick clapped him on the shoulder, a weary grin on his face. "We did it," he said, his voice hoarse with exhaustion. "We saved Zephyrus." But even as they celebrated their triumph, a new alarm blared to life. The station's self-destruct sequence had been activated, triggered by the doomsday device's deactivation. "Move!" Timothy roared, urging his team back towards their boarding pods. "We've got minutes at most." They raced through the corridors, fighting off the last pockets of Gamilon resistance. The station shook around them, explosions tearing through its superstructure as the self-destruct sequence progressed. At last they reached their pods, piling in and sealing the hatches. The small craft blasted away from the station, racing towards the safety of the human fleet. Behind them, the Gamilon orbital platform erupted in a blinding flash of light, a miniature sun blooming in the void. The shockwave buffeted the pods, sending them tumbling end over end. As the glare faded, Timothy looked back at the expanding cloud of debris that had once been the Gamilon doomsday device. They had won a great victory, but he knew the war was far from over. Admiral Xerox and the Gamilon Ascendancy would not take this defeat lightly. They would retaliate with all the fury and vengeance they could muster. But for now, Zephyrus was safe. The human resistance had struck a blow against their insectoid oppressors, and they would continue to fight no matter the cost. As the pod streaked towards the welcoming embrace of the human fleet, Timothy allowed himself a moment of grim satisfaction. They had faced the Gamilon threat and emerged victorious. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he knew that humanity would meet them head-on, united in their determination to defend their homes and their freedom. With Zorgax momentarily incapacitated, Timothy slammed his fist on the control panel, overriding the platform's gravity. The artificial gravity generators stuttered and died, leaving Zorgax and his Gamilon soldiers flailing helplessly in the sudden weightlessness. Seizing the advantage, Maverick and the human strike team surged forward, cutting down the disoriented Gamilons with precise bursts of plasma fire. They bounded through the corridors of the orbital station, using the zero gravity to their advantage, bounding off bulkheads and ricocheting around corners. "Push forward to the control room," Timothy barked, propelling himself down the passageway with powerful kicks. "We have to reach that doomsday device before they can activate it." The team burst into the central control chamber, weapons at the ready. Admiral Xerox loomed before the massive holographic display of Zephyrus, his clawed hand poised over the activation switch for the chemical weapons platform. "Surrender, primates," the Gamilon admiral snarled, his mandibles twitching. "Stand down or I'll unleash the device and bathe your world in the blood of billions." Timothy trained his rifle on Xerox, his finger tightening on the trigger. "We'll never surrender to you, Bug. Step away from the console." "I think not, human. Drop your weapons or watch your cities burn." The standoff stretched out, the seconds ticking by like hours. Timothy's mind raced, desperately seeking a solution. Suddenly he turned to Maverick, his voice low and urgent. "Get the team out of here. I'll deal with Xerox." "Are you insane?" Maverick hissed. "We're not leaving you behind." "That's an order, Lieutenant. Fall back to the pods and prepare for immediate evac." Maverick hesitated, torn between duty and loyalty to his friend. Finally, he nodded grimly. "You better be right behind us, Richardson. I'll never forgive you if you don't make it out." As the rest of the strike team reluctantly retreated, Timothy turned back to face Xerox. He slowly lowered his rifle, letting it drift in the zero gravity. "Looks like it's just you and me, Xerox. You want me? Come and get me." The Gamelon Admiral roared in fury, lunging at Timothy with his razor-sharp talons. The human soldier kicked off the deck, twisting in mid-air to avoid the slashing blows. They clashed in a brutal dance of strikes and counter-strikes, spinning through the weightless chamber. Timothy ducked and weaved, using his smaller size and agility to evade Xerox's powerful attacks. But the Gamelon was relentless, his strength and speed enhanced by the alien physiology. A vicious backhand caught Timothy across the jaw, sending him tumbling backwards. Xerox pressed his advantage, grappling the human and slamming him against the bulkhead. "Did you really think you could defeat me, meat thing?" the Admiral hissed, his claws tightening around Timothy's throat. "I will take great pleasure in watching you die." Timothy, his vision blurring, scrabbled desperately at Xerox's iron grip. His fingers brushed against the Admiral's belt, closing around the hilt of a plasma knife. With a defiant roar, Timothy unsheathed the blade and plunged it into Xerox's shoulder. The Gamelon howled in pain, his grip loosening. Timothy wrenched free, kicking off the Admiral's chest and sending himself floating towards the central console. His fingers flew over the controls, inputting the self-destruct sequence he had committed to memory. Xerox, ripping the knife from his chitinous armor, hurled himself at Timothy in a rage. But it was too late. The human soldier hit the final key, and the computer's calm voice echoed through the chamber. Self-destruct sequence initiated, detonation in T-minus 60 seconds. Alarms blared throughout the station as the countdown began. Xerox, his compound eyes widening in horror, scrambled for the escape pods. Timothy, his heart pounding, launched himself towards the nearest airlock. He barely made it into the damaged escape pod before the first explosions tore through the orbital platform. The tiny craft shuddered as it blasted away from the disintegrating station, buffeted by the shock waves. Through the pod's viewport, Timothy watched as the doomsday device erupted in a blinding flash of light, the chemical weapon stores igniting in a chain reaction that reduced the platform to a cloud of expanding debris. As the escape pod tumbled through space, its systems failing one by one, Timothy slumped back in the acceleration chair. He had done it. The doomsday device was destroyed, the Gamelon invasion dealt a crippling blow. But the war was far from over. As he drifted in the silent void, waiting for rescue, Timothy's thoughts turned to the battles yet to come. The Gamelons would not take this defeat lightly. They would return, their fury and thirst for vengeance redoubled. Earth and her colonies would need every ounce of strength and courage in the days ahead. The sacrifices had been great, but the fight for survival had only just begun. As Timothy's escape pod drifted through the void, scarred and battered from its narrow escape, a rescue shuttle maneuvered alongside it. The airlock hissed open, and a team of medics and technicians pulled Timothy from the cramped confines of the pod. The journey back to the human base passed in a blur of debriefings and medical exams. When they finally touched down, Timothy found himself surrounded by a sea of cheering soldiers and civilians. They clapped him on the back, their faces alight with hope and gratitude. "You did it, Lieutenant," one of the soldiers exclaimed. "You took out the doomsday device. The Gamelons are on the run." But even as the celebration swirled around him, Timothy couldn't shake the feeling that the war was far from over. His fears were confirmed when a grim-faced Major Davis pulled him aside. "We've got incoming, Richardson," Davis said, his voice tight. "Long-range sensors have picked up a massive Gamelon fleet massing on the edge of the system. They're coming for us, and they're out for blood." Timothy's jaw clenched. "How long do we have?" "A matter of days, at most. They're not holding anything back this time." As the human forces scrambled to prepare for the impending assault, Timothy's thoughts turned to Jake. He found his friend in the base's medical bay, his wounds bandaged and his face pale but determined. Heard you saved the day again, Tim, Jake grinned. Couldn't let you have all the fun, could I? Timothy clasped his friend's hand. Wouldn't be the same without you, Jake. The Gamelons are coming, and we need every soldier we can get. I'm with you, brother. Let's give these bugs a fight they won't forget. Together, they pored over intelligence reports and battle plans, searching for any weakness in the Gamelon offensive. An idea began to take shape, a daring raid to disrupt the enemy's supply lines, weakening their ability to sustain a prolonged assault. We hit them hard and fast, Timothy said, jabbing a finger at the holographic map. Take out their fuel depots, ammunition dumps, anything that keeps their war machine running. Jake nodded. Guerrilla tactics. Hit them where they least expect it, then fade back into the shadows. They assembled a small team of their most skilled and trusted soldiers, men and women who had proven themselves time and again in the heat of battle. In the dead of night, they slipped past the Gamelon perimeter, moving silently through the rugged terrain. Their first target was a heavily guarded supply depot, its towering fuel tanks glinting in the starlight. Timothy and Jake led the charge, their weapons spitting fire as they cut through the surprised Gamelon guards. Charges were set, timers ticking down as the team raced for cover. The explosion lit up the night sky, a towering fireball that consumed the depot and sent the Gamelons into a frenzy of confusion and panic. They struck again and again, fading into the darkness only to emerge elsewhere, leaving a trail of destruction in their wake. But as they raided a remote ammunition dump, they stumbled upon a scene of unimaginable horror. In a hidden bunker beneath the facility, they found a group of human prisoners, their bodies twisted and ravaged by some unspeakable experiment. Tubes and wires snaked from their flesh, their eyes vacant and haunted. By the gods, Jake whispered, his face pale. What have they done? A Gamelon scientist, his carapace a sickly green, emerged from the shadows, a hypodermic needle clutched in his claws. Magnificent, aren't they? He chittered, madness gleaming in his compound eyes. The perfect fusion of human and Gamelon DNA, a new breed of soldier to crush your pathetic resistance. With a hiss of insane laughter, the scientist plunged the needle into his own flesh. His body convulsed, twisting and bulging as the experimental serum coursed through his veins. The prisoners screamed in horror as the scientist's exoskeleton split and reformed, his limbs elongating into jagged claws. The creature that emerged was a nightmare made flesh, a hulking abomination of chitin and exposed muscle. "Kill it!" Timothy roared, opening fire. "Get the prisoners out of here!" The mutant Gamelon charged, its claws ripping through the air. Bullets ricocheted off its armored hide as it barreled into the midst of the human soldiers. Men and women screamed as they were tossed aside like ragdolls, their bones snapping under the creature's inhuman strength. Timothy and Jake poured fire into the monster, but it kept coming, its wounds sealing almost as quickly as they appeared. "Fall back!" Jake shouted, dragging a wounded soldier to safety. "We can't take this thing head-on." They retreated through the twisting corridors of the bunker, the mutant Gamelon in relentless pursuit. It shrugged off grenades and plasma bolts, its regenerative abilities beyond anything they had ever seen. In a desperate gamble, Timothy primed a demolition charge, tossing it into a narrow passageway. The explosion brought down tons of rock and debris, burying the creature under a mountain of rubble. But even as the dust settled, they could hear it shifting and straining, its monstrous strength slowly pushing through the obstacle. They had bought themselves a few precious moments, but the creature would not be stopped so easily. Battered and bloodied, the team emerged into the night, the rescued prisoners stumbling alongside them. In the distance, the glow of the burning depot lit up the horizon, a testament to their valiant efforts. But as they made their way back to the extraction point, the ground shook with the heavy tread of the mutant Gamelon. It burst from the rubble, its eyes blazing with inhuman fury. The soldiers turned to face the creature, their weapons raised in grim defiance. With the mutant Gamelon's twisted corpse still smoldering behind them, Timothy and his battered team raced back to the hidden human base, the precious sample of the biological weapon secure in their possession. The corridors echoed with the clang of boots on metal as they burst into the makeshift laboratory, startling the exhausted scientists hunched over their equipment. "We need a countermeasure, and we need it fast," Timothy barked, thrusting the vial of sickly green liquid into the hands of the nearest researcher. "The Gamelons are closing in, and they've got an army of those things out there." The scientists worked feverishly, analyzing the sample and comparing it to the data they'd gathered from the rescued test subjects. Hours turned into days as they labored to synthesize an antidote, the specter of the looming Gamelon attack hanging over their heads like a guillotine. "We've got it," one of the researchers exclaimed, holding up a vial of clear liquid. "It's not perfect, and we don't have nearly enough for everyone, but it should provide some protection against the biological weapon." As the antidote was hurriedly distributed among the remaining human forces, a grim-faced Major Davis convened an emergency meeting with Timothy and Jake. "Intel suggests the Gamelons are preparing for a massive offensive," Davis said, his voice heavy with fatigue. "We can't hold them off indefinitely. High Command has ordered an evacuation of all non-essential personnel and civilians from Zephyrus." Timothy and Jake exchanged a knowing look. They'd known this day would come, but it didn't make the reality any easier to bear. "We'll stay behind," Timothy said, his jaw set with determination. "A small guerrilla force to buy time for the evacuation and keep the Gamelons occupied." "It's a suicide mission," Davis warned, his eyes searching their faces. "You know that, right?" "We know," Jake replied, his voice steady. "But someone has to do it, might as well be us." As the main human fleet began the frantic evacuation, loading civilians and wounded soldiers onto every available ship, Timothy, Jake, and Maverick gathered their volunteers, a ragtag band of hardened veterans and desperate survivors, united by their resolve to make the Gamelons bleed for every inch of ground. They struck swiftly and without mercy, using hit-and-run tactics to harass the advancing Gamelon forces. Improvised explosives detonated under enemy troop transports, sending Chitin and Ichor flying. Sniper fire picked off Gamelon officers, sowing confusion and discord in their ranks. But for every small victory, the human guerrillas paid a heavy price. Plasma fire and chemical weapons tore through their ranks, leaving behind scorched earth and twisted bodies. Timothy watched as friends and comrades fell, their sacrifices etched into his memory like a litany of grief. The day Maverick died was the hardest. The brash pilot, always quick with a joke or a daring maneuver, had volunteered to lead a diversionary attack on a column of Gamelon tanks. His fighter screamed low over the rugged terrain, drawing the tank's fire as the rest of the guerrillas prepared to ambush the enemy from the flanks. But the Gamelons were ready for them. A flurry of anti-aircraft fire erupted from the tanks, catching Maverick's fighter in a web of deadly energy. The craft exploded in a ball of flame, raining debris and molten metal across the battlefield. Timothy's heart clenched as he watched his friend's fiery end, but there was no time for grief. The battle raged on, the guerrillas fighting with the desperate fury of those who know they're already dead. In the days that followed, the situation grew increasingly desperate. The Gamelons, their patience exhausted, unleashed their mutated super soldiers, armed with the deadly biological weapon. The creatures tore through the human lines, their grotesque forms shrugging off bullets and plasma fire as they spread death and terror in their wake. Timothy and Jake, their forces whittled down to a mere handful of survivors, knew they needed a game-changer. In a daring raid on a Gamelon supply depot, they managed to steal a sample of the biological weapon, fighting their way out through a gauntlet of enemy fire and monstrous guardians. Back at their hidden base, the two friends stared at the vial of green liquid, their faces grim. "We need to find a way to turn this against them," Jake said, his voice hoarse with exhaustion. "If we can't beat them on the battlefield, maybe we can beat them at their own game." Timothy nodded, his mind racing with possibilities. They'd bought time for the evacuation, but at a terrible cost. Now, with the clock ticking down and the Gamelons closing in, they needed a plan, a desperate gamble that could turn the tide of the war and give humanity a fighting chance. But what that plan might be, and whether they'd live long enough to see it through remained to be seen. In the makeshift laboratory, Timothy and Jake hunched over the stolen biological weapon sample, their faces bathed in the sickly green glow of the containment unit. Sweat beaded on their brows as they worked feverishly, isolating the key components of the virus and reprogramming its genetic structure. If we can modify the virus to target the specific DNA markers of the mutated gamelons, Timothy muttered, his fingers flying over the holographic interface, we might have a chance to turn the tide. Jake nodded, his eyes bloodshot from exhaustion. We need to work fast. The gamelons are closing in and our people are running out of time. Hours turned into days as they labored over the virus, fine-tuning its properties and testing it against samples of gamelon tissue. Finally, as the last of their supplies ran low, they achieved a breakthrough. It's ready, Timothy breathed, holding up a vial of the modified virus. Now we just need a delivery system. They scavenged parts from damaged weapons and equipment, jury-rigging a crude but effective dispersal device. As they loaded the virus into the machine, a sudden alarm blared through the base. Contamination detected, a robotic voice announced. Quarantine protocols initiated. Jake stumbled back from the workbench, his face pale. A thin trickle of blood ran from his nose, and his hands shook uncontrollably. Jake! Timothy rushed to his friend's side, catching him as he collapsed. What happened? The virus, Jake gasped, his breathing labored. I think I was exposed. Must have been a leak in the containment unit. Timothy's heart clenched as he saw the telltale signs of infection ravaging his friend's body. The virus, designed to target gamelon physiology, was attacking Jake's human cells, slowly breaking them down from within. We'll find a cure, Timothy promised, his voice cracking. Just hold on, Jake, we'll make it through this. But even as he spoke the words, Timothy knew they were empty. The virus was too virulent, too fast-acting. Jake had days, maybe hours, before it consumed him entirely. With a heavy heart, Timothy helped his friend to a cot, making him as comfortable as possible. Then he turned back to the dispersal device, his jaw set with grim determination. Xerox, he growled. This ends now. Gathering the remaining human fighters, Timothy outlined his plan. They would launch a final all-out assault on the Gamelon command center, using the virus to neutralize the mutated super soldiers and clear a path to Admiral Xerox himself. As the humans prepared for battle, donning their armor and checking their weapons, Timothy knelt beside Jake's cot. His friend's skin was ashen, his eyes glassy with pain. I'm sorry, Timothy whispered, clasping Jake's hand. I should have been more careful. I should have protected you. Jake shook his head weakly. Not your fault. We both knew the risks. He coughed, a wet, rattling sound that made Timothy's heart ache. Promise me, Tim. Promise you'll finish this. For all of us. I will, Timothy vowed, his eyes stinging with unshed tears. I swear it on my life. With a final squeeze of his friend's hand, Timothy rose to his feet, hefting the dispersal device and his rifle. He nodded to the assembled soldiers, their faces grim and determined. Let's move out, he ordered, his voice hard as steel. It's time to show these bugs what humans are made of. They emerged from the base like vengeful ghosts, their weapons spitting fire as they charged across the war-torn landscape. Gamelon soldiers swarmed to meet them, plasma bolts filling the air with the stench of ozone and charred flesh. Timothy fought like a man possessed, his rifle bucking in his hands as he cut down the insectoid warriors with ruthless efficiency. Beside him, his comrades battled with equal ferocity, their armor dented and scorched, but their spirits unbroken. They fought their way through the outskirts of the Gamelon command center, leaving a trail of shattered chitin and oozing ichor in their wake. But as they neared the central structure, a new horror emerged to bar their path. The mutated Gamelon super soldiers, their bodies grotesquely swollen with muscle and bristling with spines, surged forward like a tidal wave of flesh and fury. Their maws dripped with venomous saliva, and their eyes glowed with a feral, alien intelligence. Now, Timothy roared, raising the dispersal device. He pulled the trigger and a cloud of shimmering iridescent mist burst from the nozzle, enveloping the charging abominations. For a moment the super soldiers faltered, their movements growing sluggish and uncoordinated. Then they began to convulse, their bodies racked by spasms as the virus attacked their mutated cells. The humans pressed their advantage, pouring fire into the stricken monstrosities. Limbs tore and carapaces shattered under the onslaught, and the super soldiers fell one by one, twitching and thrashing in their death throes. At last the way was clear. Timothy and his team stormed into the command center, their boots ringing on the polished metal floors. They raced through the labyrinthine corridors, following the pulsing energy signatures that marked their target. They burst into the central chamber, weapons at the ready. And there, waiting for them like a malevolent god, stood Admiral Xerox. The Gamilon leader was a towering figure, his exoskeleton a glistening black that seemed to absorb the light. In his clawed hands, he held a pulsing, crystalline artifact that thrummed with eldritch power. "Welcome, primates," Xerox hissed, his mandibles clacking with cruel amusement. "You fought well, but your struggle is futile. Behold the power of the Gamilon ascendancy." He raised the artifact, and a beam of searing red light lanced out. Vaporizing one of the human soldiers where they stood, the chamber erupted into chaos, plasma bolts and energy beams crisscrossing in a deadly web. Timothy dove for cover, his heart pounding in his ears. He raised his rifle, sighting down the scope at Xerox's looming form. But before he could pull the trigger, a familiar figure staggered into view. It was Jake, his face twisted in agony, his body racked by the virus that was consuming him from within. In his hands, he held the dispersal device, its tank glowing with an eerie green light. "Jake, no!" Timothy screamed, but it was too late. With a final defiant roar, Jake charged at Xerox, the dispersal device held high. The Gamilon leader turned, his eyes widening in surprise and fear. He raised the artifact, but Jake was already upon him. The device detonated in a blinding flash of emerald light, the virus mist engulfing both Jake and Xerox in its deadly embrace. The Gamilon leader howled in agony, his exoskeleton blistering and cracking as the virus ravaged his body. Timothy surged forward, his rifle forgotten. He slammed into Xerox, grappling with the weakened alien in a desperate hand-to-hand struggle. They traded blows, fists and claws, tearing at flesh and chitin. But even as Timothy fought, he could feel the artifact's power growing, its energy building to a cataclysmic crescendo. The very fabric of reality seemed to warp and twist around them, the chamber filling with a blinding, searing light. With a final, desperate effort, Timothy wrenched the artifact from Xerox's grasp. The Gamilon leader collapsed, his body disintegrating into a pile of smoldering ash. But the artifact's energy only grew, threatening to consume everything in its path. "Go!" Timothy shouted to his remaining comrades, his voice raw with pain and desperation. "Get to the ships. Get our people to safety." The humans hesitated, their faces torn with anguish and loyalty. But Timothy knew what he had to do. "That's an order," he roared, his eyes blazing with resolve. "I'll hold it back, buy you the time you need. Now go." With a final agonized look, the humans turned and fled, racing for the waiting ships that would carry them to safety. Timothy watched them go, a sad smile playing across his bloodied lips. Then he turned back to the artifact, its energy swirling and pulsing like a miniature sun. He closed his eyes, reaching out with his mind, his very essence. He could feel the artifact's power, the raw, primordial forces that shaped the universe itself. With a supreme effort of will, he wrapped himself around that power, containing it, channeling it. The artifact pulsed and thrummed, its energy straining against the bonds of Timothy's mind. He gritted his teeth, pouring every ounce of his strength, his very life force, into the struggle. And then, in a blinding flash of light that seared the heavens and shook the very foundations of the planet, the artifact detonated. The explosion was cataclysmic, a roaring, searing maelstrom of energy and destruction. It consumed the Gamilon command center, vaporizing metal and stone alike, leaving nothing but a yawning, molten crater in its wake. From orbit, the human fleet watched in stunned silence as the dust settled, the scars of the battle etched into the planet's surface like a testament to the sacrifices made. On the bridge of the flagship, the survivors of Timothy's team gathered, their faces etched with grief and awe. They knew with a certainty that transcended words that their leader, their friend, was gone. But even as they mourned, they knew that his sacrifice had not been in vain. The Gamilon threat was broken, the invasion thwarted. Humanity would live on, free and unbowed, because of the courage and selflessness of one man. As the fleet turned for home, a hush fell over the ships, broken only by the soft, reverent murmurs of those who remembered and honored the fallen. The war was won, but the price had been steep, paid in blood and tears, and the lives of heroes. And though the scars of the conflict would linger, etched into the fabric of history and memory, the legacy of Timothy Richardson and all those who had fought and died beside him would endure. A shining beacon of hope and defiance, a testament to the indomitable spirit of humanity. The battle was over, but the story, the legend, had only just begun. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.